All right, welcome to February's Boston Urban Forest Friends meeting. We have a very busy and exciting uh, agenda for today. To start with an acknowledgement that it is Black History Month, and our work in large part is a commitment to dismantle forms of oppression and to ensure that marginalized voices are part of the work we do at Speak for the Trees in building an equitable urban forest. And I just wanted to drop in if you in the chat if you haven't yet seen it, our newsletter from that came out yesterday honoring Black History Month. And if Terrell were here, I don't know if he's here yet. I would just ask him to maybe just thank him for writing such a powerful piece in our newsletter. So if I can find the chat window, I will include it in there. So here are some meeting norms. So we're glad you all are here. Thank you for joining us. If you are able to add your name to the chat window and who you are, it's a good way for us to get to know each other. And if you are, if others are talking, we ask that you please remain on mute so that you won't pick up any background noise. This meeting, as I said, will be recorded. We are a community, so if you feel like you are presentable on a Friday morning, we would love to see your faces, so please turn on your cameras. If not, that's okay too. If you have questions, please raise either your real hand or your virtual hand. It's sometimes easier if you know how to raise your virtual hand, that way we can track you. And then if you have questions, you can also feel free to put them in the chat. Because we are such a big group today, and because we have so many topics to discuss, we will ask that you, we know lots of interesting questions out there and update. Just make sure that you're mindful of the time you spend speaking so all can speak and share their thoughts. And I think with that, I'll just run to the agenda. And oops, sorry, I'm trying to. There's the newsletter from yesterday. So we're going to have some time for community updates. As you may know, we are joined today by Kat Eshel and Todd Misor from the city of Boston, here to talk about the new tree ordinance that was passed in late 2023. We'll give some updates from our organization, and then also there's a survey at the end. And our next meeting will be on Friday, March 8th, same time, 11 to noon. And with that, I will stop screen share and open it up for community updates. Shara.
Morning, everyone. Give a very brief, or would like to give a very brief Shattuck Hospital site planning update. And it's brief because we're kind of in this odd pause where the state said the current plans are way too big and expensive, but we haven't heard, they're talking amongst themselves. And some of us here today are thinking, how can we have a meaningful voice in the planning of what comes next? So thank you all for following this important issue.
Sorry, I lost my unmute button. Go ahead, Erica.
Okay, yeah, I'll try to keep it quick because I've been putting this in a lot of different chat and different meetings. But myself and Paul Sutton and Nick Long from the Boston Urban Wilds team were able to go down to Miami, Florida this week to be part of a Natural Areas Forest in Cities workshop. So we did present to 18 other city teams. They're mostly made up of either the city arborists, sometimes the city planning departments, sometimes nonprofits. It's a really cool coalition. We were able to present to other cities about the Roslindale wetlands, and there will be a case study coming out in Cities in the Environment that we'll publish. So we'll be sure to share that. But we were most excited to learn what other cities are doing, both to protect trees in terms of very creative, like nature preserve ordinances and other mechanisms for protecting trees. And we have a lot of exciting ideas, especially around community engagement and equitable tree canopy management from the perspective that's a little bit less about street trees and a little bit more about natural areas, grove plantings, and restoration of forests within patches in our city. So if people are really interested in that and want to learn more, I'm going to be presenting about it on the 21st of February, and there will be a recording that I might try to send out to this group. But we're really excited to both represent Boston, get some of that work out there into the rest of the nation, and also to take what works elsewhere and try to bring it back here. So thank you all for listening, and look forward to hearing what Todd has to say.
Todd, floor is yours.
Am I next? All right. Just a quick update about information relating to our tree inventory, and again, efforts to get more information out there and share more of what we're doing. So we do have, we do get a lot of requests for people that want to use our tree inventory data, whether that's for research or for other purposes, like Speak for the Trees wants to use the data in some of their GIS applications. And so we do have that as a downloadable files now. It's on the Analyze Boston page, and it's updated daily from our tree inventory. So if anybody needs those GIS files, just want to know, go to Analyze Boston. If you search for Tree Keeper right at the top, it'll take you to the files that are there. And also related to that, you know, that's for taking the file if you just want the GIS files and you want to do something with it in your own kind of platform. But if you just want an interactive way to engage with our street tree inventory, you can still use the web-based inventory itself, called Tree Keeper. Again, there's a link to that on our webpage, boston.gov/trees. And we added a new feature on there. We've had filters, like if you want to see all the trees that were planted in during the year of 2022, there's a filter for that, all the trees planted during 2023. But we've now added another layer where if you're just kind of looking at the map, there's different colors of dots. The green dots are data points for trees that exist. The blue dots are potential planting sites. And now there's purple dots, which are the trees that are scheduled for planting, or the locations that are scheduled for planting in the next planting season. Again, this is something we decided to do really just about a week or so ago, kind of got it all kind of worked out. So it's just a nice visual if you want to see what's coming up in the next planting season. Again, this is a working list. All of our data is not in there yet, and we'll keep adding to this as we get into our planting season up into April. So again, just an effort to share what's going on and a quick visual glance if you're interested in seeing what's coming up next with the Urban Forestry Division. So just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Tremendous, Todd. Congratulations. I know that's been a big project. Diane. Diane, you're on mute, so we can't hear you. Are you still there?
Okay, here I am. Hi.
Oh,
I'm
hi.
in Charlestown. Hi, and we're going to be celebrating our 250th anniversary for the Battle of Bunker Hill in 2025. We'd like to expand our tree canopy, so we'd like to reach out to everybody who's out there if you have some ideas of how we could do that. And also, I'm wondering if anybody has any innovative ways of dealing with dog poop, because it is a challenge. We have a lot of dogs. It creates a lot of tonnage of dog poop, and it affects how we enjoy our trees. So if anybody has any ideas, I hope they could share it with me.
Yeah, and it affects how the tree's health too, if I'm not mistaken. Todd, do you want to reply to that question at all, or defer to a different time?
It is absolutely a problem. I just want to echo that. If anybody has solutions, we're open to solutions to not just dog poop, but also dog urine as well. That can actually cause a lot of damage to trees. So let's just at least educate people, however we can do that. Thank you for bringing it up.
David?
Yeah, 1 minute, Franco. You'll be next. I have Jack up next and then you.
Okay.
Go ahead, Jack.
Hi, everyone. Sorry to sneak in front of you, Franco, but always nice to be here. Just wanted to share a few quick updates from the Emerald Necklace Conservancy. We've had a big project ongoing. It's going to continue for a few more weeks to prune what's going to end up being about 700 trees in Olmsted Park. These are on, we're all Boston tree friends, but these are Boston property, DCR trees, and also Brookline trees. So working across all three of the jurisdictions. And that's been going really well. So I just want to let people know in case they're seeing tree crews out there in Olmsted Park. We also have opened registration for our spring Muddy River cleanup, which is part of the greater like Earth Day Charles River cleanup with a bunch of other nonprofits. I can post a link to those signups in the chat after if anyone's interested in getting out there and getting their hands dirty to help clean our parks. And that's on April 20th. Yeah, and we're staying busy other than that, but I'll give the floor back to David. Thanks, everyone.
Floor is yours, Franco.
Franco Campanello, Southwest Carter Park. The first 10 years of our park, the entire park was almost destroyed by dogs and people, from compaction, dog pee, and dog poop everywhere, and breaking shrubs and branches. It was a fight, but we had the good sense to send out. We got from the Boston Animal Control the addresses and of all the people who have dogs in our zip codes. And we sent out a lovely postcard, a really nice postcard that said, "Good dog, this is how you take care of your park." And it literally turned it around for the next 5 or 7 years. But now it's back to being just rampant, people going out of their way to go behind the shrubs. We're sending out another postcard, lovely, well, we're not sure what it looks like, but it's about a big postcard. And then all the volunteers are going to hand out postcards to the dog owners to say that, you love your park, don't love it to death and that. And then from a practical point, I'm learning to underplant areas with more dense shrubbery, so that at least the trees are protected. So there's a whole layer that dogs and people can't get back in, and then fencing of various types for about 1,000 linear feet of fencing, which is ropes and metal fencing and so forth. So we have 2,000 people a day in our park, and about probably 400 dogs. So the compaction is a serious problem for us, and but we managed to stay alive, and we just keep fighting.
Thank you, Franco. Remind us which park this is.
This is the Southwest Carter Park from
Southwest Carter. Okay.
In from Northeastern into Dartmouth Street, Beck Basin Station.
It's a very busy park.
Very busy.
Thank you, Franco. Amara.
Hey everyone, don't want to take too much time up. Just wanted to give the Boston Tree Alliance updates for folks. We have some exciting news that our first round of grant funding has been released. So we have all that program information on the City of Boston's website. So that's funding for community-based organizations and nonprofits for tree planting and care projects on privately owned land in the City of Boston, with specific focus on under canopied environmental justice communities. And you can find all this information on the website. Just want to put out there, we have got this funding. And so if you could spread the word, and please let me know if you have any questions. I'll drop my information in the chat. Yeah, thanks so much.
Wow, you guys were efficient. Darrell, see that? Any other announcements before we transition to our guest speakers today? Yes, Anita.
We just have a short announcement. Sorry, I haven't been here for a while, but Watertown is planning to plant a Miyawaki forest on a school site, and it could be that we'll qualify not only as a genuine Miyawaki, really following the Miyawaki method, but also as a tiny forest. which is required to have a connection with the school. So we're very excited about the connection with the school, connection with community garden plots that will also be neighbors to the forest. And it's a very rich year ahead. Thanks.
Just looking here, any other bits? Hey, so, I mean, the next slide just says essentially who we're about to hear from. I'm having a really hard time. There we go. Finding the right buttons. Where are they? All right, so believe you should be able to see my screen now. Yep. So we have an update today. We're joined today by Kat Eshel and Todd Misor. I'll let them introduce themselves and their titles, but we've invited them today to share an update on the work that the city has been doing with a tree ordinance. A public tree ordinance was passed in the final session of 2023, and I believe signed by the mayor in late December. So they're here to share about that, answer some questions from us, but I'm going to turn the table to them, the floor to them. And I don't know, Todd and Kat, if you have slides you'd like to share, but I can give you screen access if you want.
We do not have slides to share, but yeah, if just that we would chat, and we might drop some links in the chat. So nice to see folks that I've seen before or meet folks that I haven't met before. My name is Kat Eshel. I'm Chief of Staff for the Mayor's Office of Environment, Energy, and Open Space, and that means that my job is weird and I do a little bit of this and a little bit of that. And I was supporting our wonderful team over in Parks on just pulling threads together through the tree ordinance process that was initiated by then Councillor Arroyo. And I'm joined today by the real person that you want to be talking to about this stuff, Todd, who I think a lot of you know, but Todd, do you want to reintroduce yourself for newer folks on the call?
Sorry about that. It wasn't ready to unmute right then. Yeah, again, I'm sure I know most of you on here, but I'm Todd Misor. I'm the Director of Urban Forestry with the Parks Department. And ultimately, when this position was created, it was from the creation of the Urban Forest Plan with the intent to work towards implementing the Urban Forest Plan, which is a framework for the next 20 years of growing and expanding our urban forestry canopy in an equitable way with a community first or community-led initiatives.
Thanks, Todd. So that segues, I'm going to do a quick overview of what the heck is in this ordinance, assuming that maybe not everybody followed the ins and outs of a wonky council process, which is understandable. So the genesis of the ordinance really is that urban forest plan that Todd just referenced. That's the plan that got released in September of 2022, I believe. What is time? I don't know. But what happened after that urban forest plan first came out is we really turned our attention to the actual creation of the urban forestry division. And so that was, we wanted to get Todd on board, and then Todd had a lot of hiring to do. So a lot of our focus has just been on being able to build out that expanded capacity to be able to care for our street trees and our park trees as just an initial starting point. Let's care for the assets that we already have that are already providing shade and all the benefits of an urban canopy today. And so the urban forest plan, one of the components of it was not just creating that urban forest division, expanded maintenance. There are a lot of other strategies named in that plan. And one of them was a tree protection ordinance. And there are a lot of models for this out in the country. I'll be very curious to hear in the discussion about sort of models that folks have seen in other communities that they think work really well, particularly on private property. But that was the genesis for this ordinance was really the fact that council had introduced something the previous year all the way back in 2021, actually. And we had asked them to hold off on really getting the process started in an ordinance until we finished the urban forest plan, because that was really where we were having a lot of rich conversations in community around how we want to be caring for our urban canopy as a community. And we wanted sort of any policy discussion to really be derived and driven by the conversations that we were having in that setting. And so that's part of the reason why, even though there was a version of an ordinance introduced in 2021, we actually asked them to hold off because it was really important that the priorities be set by that process first. So then after the urban forest plan was released, there was an original draft of an ordinance that was reintroduced at the beginning of the next council session. And that meant that we sort of had to go through a process. We were working through a council process, and a council process is a little different from when maybe a city goes about organizing a process to put together an ordinance. In another hat that I wear, I worked a lot on the ordinance to the Building Emissions Reduction Disclosure Ordinance, which is an ordinance to reduce carbon emissions from large buildings, where that was a process that we led from the city side. So we had a lot more flexibility. It didn't necessarily have to go through sort of like city council hearings and city council working sessions. So whereas this was an ordinance introduced by city council, so we kind of had to go through that process. And so I would say, to Erica's question that just dropped in the chat, the answer is no, because it depends if it's city initiated or council initiated. If it's council initiated, that's kind of council's thing. And it's kind of inappropriate for the city to be sort of too involved in it, because we have to really follow their lead. We can work collaboratively with them, but it's really their process. If it's a city initiated process, there isn't a central place where all ordinances are being tracked all across the city. So it really might be at a department level. So for example, when we were doing the BERTA ordinance, which was a city initiated process, we were sending updates through the environment newsletter and eventually the BERTA newsletter. So it can really depend, which I know is the worst kind of answer I could give you. So that was a little bit of just like the process that we went through. One of the really early decisions that was made was sort of as we were building up sort of this capacity on the city side, we sort of reached an early agreement that it probably made sense to sort of get things right on the city side and think about standardizing and sort of having a similar benchmark, sort of like minimum level of process for public trees, city trees that are public shade trees, so that are already regulated under state law, and sort of maybe layering a little bit more on top of what's already in state law, and obviously not doing anything different from what's prescribed under state law, because it is pretty prescriptive and not always, it might need some updating as well, but we don't control state law. But then also thinking about other trees on municipal properties. So thinking about trees that are on school properties, on housing authority property, and all of our other sort of quasi-city agencies. And so we had a lot of conversations with our internal partners and department agencies, just to benchmark kind of what their practices were already around sort of how they maintain their trees on an ongoing basis, and then how they might treat trees in the context of a capital improvement project. So kind of those are the two main threads that we were looking at. And it was actually really good to hear that in general in their ongoing maintenance, most people were like, we don't have that much money. We're not pulling out trees for fun. They're an asset. They are only removing trees on an ongoing basis. If the tree is dead, if it's dying and can't be helped, if it's diseased in a way that might threaten other trees, or if it's an invasive, or if there's some kind of pest problem. So, and that's really similar to the standard that's already set in MGL Chapter 87, the section of state law that regulates public shade trees. So that was actually really good to hear that a lot of their practice for ongoing maintenance of trees actually really aligns with the standards that are set for ongoing care for public shade trees, and sort of the reasons for which you might be, why it would be reasonable to do a removal under state law. And then the other piece was for capital improvement projects, we found that some agencies were sort of talking about tree removals that might need to happen in the context of capital improvement project, but it wasn't necessarily consistently done across the board. People didn't feel like there just wasn't a consistent practice around things like publishing a tree inventory, talking about tree protection plans, having a certified arborist actually do that work. It was happening in some cases, but it just wasn't like totally consistent across the board, and there was no sort of statement internally that needed to be a practice in place. And so that was one of the big components was just having that benchmark so that when there are trees proposed to be discussed for potential removal as part of a capital improvement project, that there's actually a public noticing method, that there's actually a public meeting in which people are talking about it, and we're actually asking the public to weigh in and share their sort of perspectives, where they're actually developing tree protection plans, sharing them with the tree warden for the tree warden to have a chance to review and provide feedback as well. And just building stronger internal processes for more consistent awareness raising for members of the public and having the Parks Department get looped in a lot more. So I would say that that's a little bit sort of like the wonky process stuff that happened from a process standpoint. Some other really important provisions of the tree ordinance for public trees. So, because this does not include private trees, there was the creation of an advisory committee that is solely for the purpose of advising the commissioner with regards to implementation of the urban forest plan. And we had to do that because if this were a committee with decision-making authority, it can't, there's a lot of other bodies in the city that already have a role to play in thinking about open space and public space, and you can't usurp the authority of an existing board when you create a new one. And so this is already a space where there's a lot of bodies that do have a role to play. That was sort of one challenge. And then the other challenge is that if you create a public body that is making decisions and not purely advisory, they become subject to open meeting law and they become subject to conflict of interest law, which means that if you were an advocate sitting on the board, you wouldn't be able to take money for other activities related to advocacy. It makes it a little bit complicated to both be in the advocacy nonprofit space and be on that board. You might have to recuse yourself from a lot of decisions, or you wouldn't actually be able to meet in community outside of the context of an official board meeting. And so it just would also impede the ability of groups to organize. And so there are a lot of reasons why it can be good to have a board, but there are a lot of reasons why it might not actually be helpful. But in any case, what this does create is a standing committee that will meet regularly, that will help to democratize some information. Hopefully this group can continue to also sort of be another counterpoint and sort of be used in a different way. But at the very least, it'll be sort of a regular touch point where folks in community can sort of come together and we can all discuss sort of how we're all contributing to implementation of our shared urban forest plan. The other sort of piece that is a little different and that we're really excited about to work on is around, we sort of gave ourselves the ability to create guidance to guide the permitting of utility work in the critical root zone. A lot of our down trees, our down public shade trees, sometimes they get them down in a storm because their root system got damaged by utility work. And so being able to set consistent standards and have guidance, this is going to be a collaborative project. We wrote it really carefully in the ordinance to make sure that the Office of Streets, who we were speaking with during the creation of the ordinance, and the Boston Parks and Recreation Department are going to work collaboratively on this piece. We're going to be able to set that sort of those shared guidelines as to what the appropriate procedure is, having an arborist sort of supervising work, what happens when you hit a root of a certain diameter, so that we're not amputating our trees and then wondering why it is that they fall over the next season. So we're really excited for that work to happen. In terms of timeline, I'm gonna sort of give sort of the high level dates. So as David alluded to, this was passed by City Council in their final session on December 12th. I didn't know if it was gonna happen. They told me on Monday afternoon that they were scheduling the vote, and I was like, oh, I guess we are doing this. Okay. So it was a little bit of a wait and see, and then it happened. And then Mayor Wu signed the ordinance into law on December 29th. That means that the ordinance actually hasn't gone into effect yet. It goes into effect 90 days later, in part so that other city agencies and departments can sort of take stock of what the changes might be and be able to reflect those changes in their operations. And so it takes effect after 90 days, so that will be March 28th. And so the reason why I want to flag that date is because those like noticing requirements will only apply to new projects that get started after that date goes into effect. So if something's already midstream and underway, the ordinance won't apply to them, just because it wouldn't be fair to a project to get caught up in something midstream if maybe they've done like parts of it, but haven't like followed the letter, having to like redo a meeting when they've already closed something. So I just want to note that that's sort of why that date matters. But there are some other things that are in progress. So I might turn it over to my colleague Todd to speak to things like the advisory committee.
Thanks, Kat. I know there's a lot going on there. There's a lot that you've talked about in the background. I know people have a lot of questions about this process, this part of the ordinance, and of course, the next step is how do we protect trees on private property? And there's already a couple questions in the chat, so I just want to give kind of a quick update of what's going on from the implementation standpoint of this, right? Because ultimately, again, this came out of the urban forest plan process, and my job is to help implement these things that come along. And I do want to point out that in the urban forest plan, there was a call for some regulation and tree protection, and that was identified as a critical action item and an early action item. Now, early action items are within the first 5 years after the release of the plan. So we're a year and a half from the release of the plan. So we are actually moving along at a good progress in step with what was called for in the urban forest plan. Again, I know to advocates, this may seem like nothing's happening quickly or it's just not fast enough. But it is a process that has to, we have to go through one step at a time to get to that final goal. But again, just to give a little more update about some of these things that we've talked about, first and foremost, this is really going to drive how we collaborate internally, especially with, as Kat pointed out, the streets cabinet, that's public works, and with water and sewer, they do a lot of work in the public right of way that does impact trees. We need to have this better communication, come up with these guidelines. Again, that is going to be the next part of the process of these agencies getting together and coming up with these standards and guidelines and making sure that they're adhered to on their work sites moving forward. Something I mentioned earlier in our community updates with the data availability, part of the reason I made sure that was available was for other city agencies. It wasn't just for nonprofits out there or researchers that want access to our data, but other city agencies really need to know what's going on with our trees. And this came up where we had a situation where we're talking about where we're putting EV chargers. And it turns out we had planted trees in a spot where EV chargers were planned to go, several months from now. And so again, trying to get this information, trying to communicate with the public, communicate internally. Again, we've got a lot of work to do on that. We know historically we have not been good at that. So we're trying to make progress in any way possible. Another thing that was called for within the ordinance was, it did kind of highlight what's done with Massachusetts general law, that chapter 87, which protects public shade trees. And part of this is there was an asking for reporting on a regular basis about tree hearings that we have for developers or anybody that may have something that impacts a tree on the public right of way. That state law requires to have that tree hearing for that. So we're looking at how do we have kind of a central repository where people can get this information. And we're looking at how do we build out our urban forestry webpage to include information, make sure you're aware of upcoming tree hearings. We can look at this as a way to, inform people about any kind of tree information about public agencies that are doing work relating to trees. Again, we won't be the ones necessarily coordinating that effort for that other agency. It'll be part of their public engagement process, but we can be a central repository for information for advocates that want to know there's, trees are going to be talked about at this meeting or whatever. Again, we're looking at how we can make it easy for people to be aware of these opportunities to engage around trees. Again, this is not an ordinance that solely affects the Parks Department or the work of the Parks Department. So again, we're looking at a way to make it easier for others to be aware. And of course, there was this Forestry Advisory Committee. I think Erica and some others asked questions about this. Again, ultimately, these are members appointed by the Parks Commissioner, but we want to make sure we have a robust process to include as many people as possible. Specifically, the ordinance calls for people from residents from under-canopied neighborhoods or environmental justice areas, and especially some representation of youth residents from the city of Boston. So as Kat pointed out, the ordinance goes into effect March 28th. And then the ordinance calls for within 6 months convening this Urban Forestry Advisory Council. So we're targeting kind of, I'll call it early summer to midsummer to kind of have a first meeting. We want to coming up soon, we want to sort of have an outline of what we're looking for a member. We want them to probably serve like a 2-year term. There might be a little extension from that because we want some consistency with the voices that are on here, but we don't want people to be there forever as well. So again, we're sort of formulating what that'll be. We're going to look at how we can get nominations for this, and then make sure we have a good representation across the city and what's called for in the ordinance. Again, what's called for in the urban forestry plan about engaging, again, with equity first, engaging under canopied neighborhoods. And the ordinance calls for a minimum of 7 members on this. Again, we'll probably look to increase that a little more than that, maybe 9 or 10 to begin with. And then again, this can be a process of the committee itself can discuss how, if and when to expand that, or the best way to expand that. Again, once we get the advisory council in place, they're really there to help us implement the urban forestry plan. And that's the input that we're going to be getting from them. So again, we've got a couple of things that are moving forward here with the ordinance that was passed. And I know there's still more work to be done there. And I think there was a question about, again, protecting trees from developers. And I do want to just emphasize that point again. If a developer impacts a tree on the public right of way, there is a public process for that with the tree hearing. And we do want to make that, again, better known to residents and advocates how to participate in that process and the results of past tree hearings. So again, we're looking at making that as public as possible.
Yeah. So there's a lot of like moving pieces and like really boring, dry things that we're trying to do on our end. Things like, to request a tree removal hearing, we're actually going to have a form instead of people randomly submitting 3-1 requests. And it's also as simple as having like trees@boston.gov set up as an email address and having the website set up so that there's like consistent information. So like boston.gov/trees. So we're like working on a lot of like back end admin things. And part of that is to make it sort of, we hope, clearer for members of the public, certainly for trees that are like directly under parks. And then working and supporting our sort of sister departments and agencies as they sort of tweak their processes. So particularly around things like noticing requirements for any potential trees that are proposed to be removed as part of a capital improvement project.
Todd and Kat, I thank you so much. I want to see if we could transition into questions now. Yeah, is that good? Okay, leaves us some time. So I want to first thank you for joining us today, of course, but also I know that you've been working a long time on this ordinance, and there have been a lot of back and forth with advocates, and we appreciate, the open conversations that have been had. It's good to see this now being enacted. And I just want to reference one thing you mentioned, Kat, which I'm learning to appreciate more and more, is how much work it takes to get your back end up and running. That invisible work that takes a long time and is surprisingly challenging sometimes. And I can only imagine in a bureaucracy as old and complicated as Boston, it's probably many, many degrees more complicated than a 6-person staff. So I can only imagine. So thank you for that.
Getting templates approved. So fun.
Oh my God. Oh yeah. Our approval process is probably a lot easier. I think there was a couple of questions before we turn to like a conversation that we received. Well, some in the chat too. I guess one of the questions is there a way to a measurement or some way that you all are thinking about to actually determine whether the ordinance is being effective in the goals it set out?
Well, again, I'm not sure how to exactly quantify this, but I really want to judge it by the engagement that we have, certainly interdepartmentally, right? Like I said, this is not a Parks Department ordinance. This does not just affect the Parks Department, but we're really trying to elevate the status of trees as a public asset. That again, previously every other department would just say, oh, I'm doing a infrastructure project. The tree, that's the parks thing. It's not my department, right? So how do these standards and engagements really get to these other departments that that it really becomes something that's just put into every job spec and every bid package? And I will say I do think it will have some impact. Maybe we just see how many times do the specs appear out there? How many times do we find violations beyond that? We can begin to look at those, collect those statistics over time. Again, I don't know that I have the perfect judge of this, whether it's successful or not, that I can tell you before it's even implemented.
Sure. Yeah, I guess one of the questions I have, and maybe Kat, you might have a longer institutional memory, is sort of what pre-ordinance data might we be able to compare it to, if any?
I don't know that it's like comparing data. It's just that like our data will be more up to date because part of this is that they actually have to tell us when trees get removed. Like other departments will have to actually tell us when that happens. So we'll actually know and be able to like update our own records accordingly when a tree has been removed. That is positive. So it's that we'll have or when it's planted as well, because they're sending in their tree protection plans and their tree inventories and their like landscaping plans, we'll actually have a better record of the canopy and how it's shifting in our own records. So we'll be able to reflect that in Tree Keeper. That's a huge shift. So it's hard because it's like it's like an intangible data quality thing. But it's that it will be we were already updating it. It's just that it will be actually more up to date.
Right. I think my question is like a little different. It's without data from before the ordinance, we actually don't have a base on to know what to compare how effective the ordinance has been, unfortunately. Okay.
I think this is one where because it's a lot of like process-based improvements, it's going to be more of like
Yeah.
a qualitative thing of like
Okay.
people have updated their notice requirements. And I think in general, it's sort of like, if you see a process where maybe they didn't do that, maybe let us know and we can remind them like, hey friends, this is how we're supposed to do things now. We talked about this. So, like let's they're also changing processes. Change it's hard, it takes time. Sometimes you have folks who have been doing their job for many years and are like, wait, I gotta do what now? So yeah, I think we'll try to give them some grace and sort of bring people along, get them bought into the mission, get them understanding that hey, these trees are precious. And we shouldn't be taking them out unless they're literally dead, dying, disease invasive or have pests and need to be removed.
Thank you. So I'll just go down the list here of people with their hands raised. And if you have a question, please raise your hand. So I'll start with Diane.
Hi, thank you. One of the problems we have here in Charlestown, because our streets are so narrow, is this invisible destruction of our tree canopy through the construction, through the movers. And I was wondering if there's a way, like when moving trucks get a permit, could they get a refundable deposit? And so that they have to take a picture of the tree that is on the street where they get the permit before and after, so that we know that they don't wipe out limbs or the entire tree. We had an enormous, like 90-year-old tree that was taken out by a room and board big truck. The construction vehicles, when they get a permit to rehab a house in town, could they have a tree ordinance deposit that would be freely reimbursed if they do not damage our trees? And I don't know what the going rate is for a reasonable caliber sized tree as a replacement, because otherwise they'll just tack it on to the owner's price. But to make it, like a car rental deposit that it's onerous enough, you're not going to drive off and just do damage and say screw it. So if that's something that you could think of, or any way around that, because we're losing dozens and nobody's reporting them because it's no agency that's there watching. Maybe you have some thoughts on that, Todd and Kat.
I don't have thoughts per se, but we can raise it with it's the transportation department that issues moving permits. And yeah, thanks for raising that, Diane. We'll raise it, we'll pass it along and see sort of what other sorts of changes they're considering already making potentially to the moving permit process.
And I do just want to say, you're absolutely right. The above ground portion of the tree can get damaged just as easily as the below ground portion of the tree during construction projects or whatever. So we need to continue to be aware of that. And as Kat said, we can talk to other departments and see what we might be able to implement.
Thank you. Actually, it's an issue that's happening in Watertown. There's a big construction project. And one of the things I was thinking about doing to protect above ground trees is instead of the wraps that go around the trees, actually building like a 2x4 cage, which I've seen before in New York, which actually gives a buffer around the tree as opposed to just a wrap, because you can still hit the tree. All right, Lisa.
Yes, hi everybody. So great to see everybody and also to have this conversation with Kat and Todd. So Todd, thank you for that segue when you were, well, anyway, so this isn't necessarily tree ordinance, but maybe before we go today, the two of you can address, or Kat maybe more, how is the Environment Department working with the BPDA and the city with this intensive squares and streets density development designs to get more climate resilience incorporated into the design specs? Because it's not in any way clear how that it is that there are any mechanisms in place to protect existing trees, permeable soil. The offsets in the designs are minimal, which is an understatement. And then also, if before you go, if you could just mention, we had heard that Chief White Hammond is leaving, and sort of what are next steps in terms of leadership for the department. Thank you.
I might let Todd, do you want to take sort of zoning and sort of some of the things that we're talking to BPDA about? I've been talking to them mainly about food pantries, so I'm probably not the best person to speak about that.
Again, all of this is still ongoing. I would say we have a lot of room there to grow in what we're doing, but I think BPDA is certainly, they're open to having more discussions with us on how to make space for trees. Again, everything's a long process. I don't want to say anything's gonna be solved in a month or one or two conversations, but I will say we are engaged and with planning. And of course, planning's now moving into being a city agency. So, there's a lot of sort of transition that's going on in their realm as well. So again, we're engaging in the conversation. We're going to keep moving along with them on that journey to keep finding any way that we can, and whether it's on a particular project we're talking about something or overall kind of standards that they're setting across the city.
With regards to the transition of Chief White Hammond, there's not too much that I can share. I just the mayor's office is really focused on minimizing downtime. And so they are sort of starting the search for a new chief. And I think in general, it's sort of the same way as for like budget season. Like if you have thoughts, send them. So I think in general, this is a very important part of mayor's agenda. Our open space and our tree canopy and our sort of ecological resources that are here in the city are part of the climate solution, and that's something that's front and center. The Parks Department is also a really large part of the cabinet. It's a very large staff of 250 that grows seasonally. And so that's it's a large organization to manage. And so definitely Parks is a big priority as part of the hiring process. But in terms of timeline, I think they're hoping to have somebody kind of able to take over sort of just as the chief transitions out, or potentially to even have transition time. They really are hoping to avoid having any sort of downtime.
Thank you, Allison.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate both of you coming today. And I feel like some of the success has already permeated throughout City Hall. My own experience with both landmarks and the Civic Design Commission has really seen a change with demolition delay applications. They ask how many trees are on the site, how many trees will have to come down. In the Highland Park ACD district, they are asking for replacement trees for any trees that are coming down on a site where there's going to be development. So it feels like the marketing of this has permeated a little bit more than maybe other people know, but I was very interested in what's going to happen in the 90 days. You said negotiations with the streets cabinet and water and sewer, and does that impacts how they're reviewing applications for
So
yeah,
what the
go ahead.
setting of guidelines for utility permitting, that's not on a 90-day timeline. The 90-day timeline is just the effective date of the ordinance. So there isn't a prescribed timeline, mainly because it's complicated. There's a lot of different types of utilities. And so we don't have a clear timeline on that process. We wanted to but we have a collaborative partner and we have a meeting set to get that conversation going, but it isn't on a 90-day timeline. Yeah. So I
Okay,
just wanted to
okay.
clarify that, but we're excited about it.
Okay, well, you said they were you were involved in conversations with them over these 90 days. So I thought that meant reviewing applications. Okay,
No, I mean, eventually it's going to be about sort of, as utility work gets permitted through the Public Improvement Commission, they have the ability to set standards for how that utility work happens. That's sort of the main sort of piece that we see that sort of getting articulated.
okay, great. Thank you.
And I just wanted to say thank you for offering that you have seen some positive impact from this already. Again, it's going to take time, but if we can make any small steps along the way, it's good that we can celebrate those.
All right, so I'm mindful, Pat and Todd, that it is 11:54, and if you have to leave at 12, just feel free. We don't want to hold you, but I will turn it over to Anne.
Hey, thanks, David. Want to echo thanks for Kat and Todd and all the work that your departments have been doing. So this potential next step in the future of opening up for an ordinance that would be inclusive of private property. And I just wanted to ask what your thoughts on it are. And I know it's a city council process, and I know that you all were in deep discussion with the city council for how the first round might go. And I really do appreciate all that it takes to just implement the work you were already doing and implement this current iteration of the ordinance. And yet, advocates are very concerned that the private property piece not be left kind of in on the side of the road. And, there's discussion of, proactive discussions with Councilor Coletta, who's now head of Environment and Open Space, and I forget who's head of the government's ordinance committee now. But what do you see in terms of your preferred timeline and process to have this discussion and move forward on an expanded ordinance? Because, every tree that comes down is that doesn't need to is a problem. And then if there's any time, I'd love it if, I think this would be Kat, could talk briefly to artificial turf issues in the city. And the mayor sort of declared a couple of years ago that there wouldn't be artificial turf on, city property, but it's not embedded as a policy, to my understanding. It's kind of a practice, and I think it's an incredibly important issue. Thank you.
I guess on timeline, we see a lot of that. It doesn't have to be a council process, right? And I think, Todd, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're also hoping to have the advisory committee up and running to help inform that conversation. The other piece is we're not hearing great feedback from other cities as to how some of these other ordinances work operationally. Like, in fact, a lot of them say like it's really unworkable. So I think as organizers who have connections to other communities, would love if you hear of a city that thinks that it's great and they love how their private tree ordinance works. I don't want to out anyone. Um, like it's
So, yeah,
sometimes it's holding confidence, where it's just sort of like the staffing level is insane and it takes away from people's actual job and they're not able to take care of their actual canopy because they spend all of their time enforcing private canopy and inspecting private canopy. That's the kind of thing that we hear. And so I'm seeing Sarah mention Austin. We're like happy to sort of like reach out to cities sort of over time and sort of like hear from them sort of what they think works and what doesn't. But that's the main feedback that we hear is that people are just like, don't do it. You won't have any time left for your staff to take care of your existing canopy. That's just candidly sometimes what we
can
hear.
I quickly interject here, because you might have to leave. I want to just give, sorry, Sarah, we'll get to you in a minute. Nora, is here, and Josh also, he might have left, but, wanted to share with you an update from this project we're doing with Northeastern, because it's exactly on this point.
Yeah, absolutely. This was such a fantastic segue. Really great to meet you all. My name is Nora Massler, and I'm a graduate student at Northeastern in the Urban Planning and Policy program. And as part of our capstone project, myself and two of my peers are actually working with Speak for the Trees to research private tree ordinances, and kind of get to understand how they've worked and not worked, perhaps, in different municipalities. And I am personally a planner in the town of Acton out west. So hopefully I'll bring kind of a sense of that kind of logistical challenges and opportunities. But we're, really excited to start looking into it and meet you all and share with this group what we've learned throughout that process.
So Nora, would you mind dropping your email in the chat if you feel comfortable, and folks can reach out to you, and we'll include it also in the notes.
That would be great. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. And
I'd be
then,
very interested in hearing what you come up with, what you find over the course of your research.
As am I.
thank you for joining us, Nora. And last but certainly not least, Sarah.
Hi again. Todd left us with kind of a cliffhanger on the new trees planted where EV chargers were planned. How did that resolve?
I saw that question in the chat, Sarah. I was gonna get to it. Well, it actually led to a very good conversation because ultimately we want both in a single spot, right? We don't want to just, because the idea is that these would be, parking spaces parallel to the street and having multiple chargers there, like 4 spaces in a row dedicated to EV charging. So that could be like 60 feet of sidewalk utilized, adjacent to the parking. So the idea is, as long as the infrastructure between them is in the street, we think we can still plant trees in that same location. Again, it just came out that they had something in mind. They had a location picked out, and we happened to plant trees there. And again, we weren't talking to each other. We had no idea that this was coming up. So again, now that we have a conversation, I want to share as much data as I can. We want to know their planting locations. Maybe it's probably better if the EV chargers are installed first and then we do the trees, or maybe it's a combination of we can plant the trees as the installations go forward. Again, we're in conversations, but we want to make sure that we can have space on the sidewalk for both. They should not be exclusive.
Thank you, Todd. I mean, I think if we give ourselves all the grace to learn and grow, we're all, doing the best we can with a very complicated system. And I really appreciate all the work that you and your department has put in. And, I think we've gotten the biggest crowd we've had in a long time. And that's to say that, people are really interested and appreciative of your work, and the whole department and the staff over at the mayor's office. So thank you. We are at time. So I thank you all. We'll be sending notes out, and we hope to see you in March. Have a great February.